Nicole, despite seeing this image, she agreed with the consensus that Menhaz is still just trolling us. This picture is not proof that he's really doing this four-step plan. And so Nicole went back to playing Perfect World, and about an hour later, she noticed there were all sorts of new notifications on her Discord server. So once again, she stopped her game, she opened up the Discord server, and once again, the entire chat was dominated about Menhaz, because Menhaz had sent a second picture, apparently representing him completing the second step of his big four-step plan. And once again, everyone's saying, there's no way, he's trolling us, this can't be real. And Nicole, she looked at the image itself, and she too thought this has got to be trolling. But now, she wasn't just filled with pure disbelief. She wasn't able to just completely discard what was happening here, because part of her was thinking, like, how is Menhaz getting these hyper-specific images that really are tethered to this exact plan he's laid out? Like, how does he have these images? Where are they coming from? Now, this was back in 2019, and certainly AI technology existed, but not the way it does now, where the average user can literally, in seconds, create hyper-specific images using AI. In 2019, that really wasn't available to most people, and so really the only way Menhaz could potentially have these images, at least in Nicole's mind, was he had to have pulled them off some website somewhere and basically pretended they were images that he took. And so Nicole decided she was actually going to take the two images he had sent and reverse image search them to try to figure out where they came from, find the website, where he's pulling them from, because clearly these pictures are not authentic. There's no way Menhaz actually took these photos. But when Nicole reverse image searched both images, nothing came up. Now, Nicole thought, okay, that does seem to suggest these are authentic pictures he really did take, which maybe means he's actually doing this plan, even though that seemed totally preposterous. Or she thought maybe, these images have been pulled from such an obscure website somewhere that I don't have access to, finding them in a reverse image search, that maybe that's what it is. And so at this point, Nicole told herself, you know what, there's got to be a reasonable explanation for this, but I'll tell you this, it can't be that Menhaz is actually following through on this plan. It's not possible. And so once again, she minimized the Discord server and got back into the game. But pretty quickly, Nicole just stopped playing the game because her mind was totally fixated on whatever was going on with Menhaz. And so she opened up the Discord server again, and she saw still everybody in the chat was talking about Menhaz and these two pictures he had sent. And basically the server was divided. About half the members believed this really was just Menhaz trolling, and the other half was starting to think that, hey guys, this might be real. He might actually be carrying out this four-step plan. Those pictures might be real. And if that's the case, we have a huge problem, because this plan, if he actually carries it out, is so completely illegal. He can't do this. This is not okay. And so the faction of members on the Discord server that were starting to sense that this four-step plan of Menhaz's might actually be real began to talk internally, and they said, look, like, we can't just sit here and do nothing if Menhaz is actually doing this. We have to stop him. This is not okay. And so in fact, one of these members actually contacted their local police and told them, hey, there's this guy on my Discord server, his username is Menhaz, I don't have his actual name, but he's doing something that could be very bad, and you need to look into it. And so the dispatcher said, okay, well, where does Menhaz live? And the person who had called was like, well, I don't actually know. In fact, I really don't know much about him other than the fact that he goes by Menhaz and he sent these crazy pictures that could be real or not, I don't know. And so eventually the dispatcher just said, look, like, I get it that you're concerned, but we have nothing to go on here. And remember, this is the internet. People make stuff up all the time. And so pretty quickly after that, the police officer just hung up, and that was that. Are you the type of person who has binged basically all of my YouTube videos, and every week you anxiously wait a new upload? If so, thank you, but also you're in luck. Because if you didn't know this, we actually have a separate podcast, the Mr. Ballin Podcast, that has literally hundreds of stories that are not on YouTube that you can binge right now. That podcast is available on all podcast platforms and exclusive to the podcast. But as a result, it was like nobody was doing anything about what Menhaz was claiming. And Nicole and the other members who, again, were beginning to sense this could be real, they felt terrible about just sitting here doing nothing. And so Nicole and a few other members of the Discord server decided to team up digitally and actually investigate Menhaz themselves, try to figure out like who this guy is and really what's he up to. And so Nicole and this new investigative group started by combing through all the chat logs in their Discord server to see if Menhaz at any point had either intentionally or unintentionally dropped hints about his real name and his location. And eventually they came across a message where Menhaz actually said his real first name was Menhaz. That wasn't just his username, that was his real name. And that was great because Menhaz was a pretty unique name. And so Nicole and the group thought, okay, well, if we find where in the world that name is somewhat common, maybe that will give us a rough idea of where to look for Menhaz in the world. They also knew that Menhaz was a college student, or at least he claimed to be. Now, he never actually said where he went to college, but he would often, in the Discord server, tell people when he was going to be on the server and when he was going to be off the server, like for classes and for studying and that kind of thing. He'd say, okay, hey, I'll be on at 6 p.m. tonight, or I'll be off at 9, I'll be back on at 8. He would give these specific times, and he would always use Eastern Standard Time when he did that. And so a natural assumption that Nicole and her group made was, okay, very likely Menhaz lives in the Eastern time zone. And that time zone included the entire East Coast of the United States, Eastern and Central Canada, and also some countries in South and Central America. But while that was helpful, it still created too broad of an area in the world for this group to realistically look for Menhaz. It was nearly impossible to actually figure out where he was. But they now had a sense of where he could be, and they thought, okay, well, why don't we ask somebody else in the Discord server if they can try to track Menhaz's IP address? An IP address can be used to find the approximate geographical location of a computer. And sure enough, someone in the server said they could do that, and within a few minutes, they had tracked Menhaz's computer to Toronto, Canada. However, right at the same time they were figuring this out, Menhaz sent a third picture across the Discord server. A picture that showcased him completing step 3 of this 4-step plan, allegedly. And for Nicole and many other members of this Discord server, this third picture really represented a big shift. Because now it was getting terrifying. Because look, it seems pretty likely at this point that Menhaz is actually doing this. This is real. How could he possibly have these hyper-specific photos that are perfectly synced with this 4-step plan he had come up with? This feels real. And so Nicole, she actually asked the person who had traced his IP address to Toronto, she said, hey, should we call the Toronto police and tell them what's going on here? You know, maybe they can go find him and stop him before he completes this plan. I mean, he's apparently completed 3 steps. There's only 1 step left. We have to stop him here. But the person who had tracked his IP address to Toronto said, look, what are the police gonna do? There's 6 million people that live in Toronto, and all we have is that maybe his computer is in Toronto and maybe these pictures are real. And also, by the way, it's pretty easy to mask your IP address. You can use something called a VPN or virtual private network that when you track someone's IP address that has one of those working, it will make it seem like their address is, for example, in Toronto or Chicago or New York or Dallas or anywhere in the world, when in reality, their computer is somewhere totally different. And so the police are not going to launch a manhunt based on an IP address. It's not 100% accurate. And so basically, Nicole realized that even though they saw they are on the precipice, potentially, of Menhaz committing some horrible crime, and they can't do anything about it because they don't really have any information about Menhaz. And so at this point, everybody on the Discord server was basically begging Menhaz to come clean, tell us these photos are fake, tell us this plan of yours is really just you trolling. But Menhaz didn't do that. He doubled down and said, oh no, these are all real. And in fact, I'm going to complete step 4 of this plan and complete the whole process in 30 minutes. And after that, all Nicole and the other members of the Discord server could do was just try to convince Menhaz not to do this. Don't follow through with this. Don't complete the plan. You've got to stop. It's not worth it. But Menhaz refused and said, I'm doing this no matter what. And sure enough, 30 minutes later, Menhaz would send one final picture, the 4th picture, showcasing that his 4-step plan was now complete. At this point, someone from the Discord server did call the Toronto police. The following day, at about 3:30 p.m., police officers arrived outside of Menhaz's home, which it would turn out was located in a small town just north of Toronto. The IP address had been correct. By this point, it had now been about 24 hours since Menhaz had sent the very first picture of his four-step plan. Police knocked on the front door, having no idea what to expect here. They had seen the images Menhaz had sent on the Discord server, but at this point, until they went inside, they had no idea if they were dealing with a terrible crime or a terrible joke. When the door opened, Menhaz himself was standing in the doorway. He had a totally neutral, very calm expression on his face. He was very gracious. He welcomed the police inside. And when they stepped inside, they asked him, what's going on here? And all Menhaz said was, "You'll see." So the police walked further into the home and eventually made their way upstairs. And when they got up there, they just froze. Because it would turn out, Menhaz was not trolling. Those pictures were not fake. He really had carried out that four-step plan. It would turn out, for the past 4 years, Menhaz had been living a double life. To his friends and family, he was a college student studying engineering, and he was on a path to great success. But in reality, he dropped out of college in his first year and just pretended to go to school every day, when in reality, he would just go to a local mall and hang out there, and then in the evenings, when school was over and he would come back home, he would just immerse himself in video games, specifically that Perfect World game. That's what he did. He just went to the mall and played video games and lied to his friends and family. But July 27, 2019, the day Menhaz put his four-step plan into action, was literally the last day he could maintain this ruse. Because the next day, July 28, 2019, was the day Menhaz was scheduled to graduate from his college. And so his friends and family were all expecting to be there and to see this amazing ceremony. And so to deal with the fact that his real life and his fake life were about to collide, Menhaz came up with his four-step plan. And he literally told the members of the Discord server about his big plan, but nobody believed him because he was always trolling people. It just seemed like, oh, this is made up, another one of Menhaz's lies. But he was not lying. It was all true. Those pictures that he sent across were absolutely authentic. He took those pictures, and they did represent completing each step in the plan. The first picture was of his mother, the second picture was of his grandmother, the third picture was of his sister, and the fourth picture was of his father. And in each picture, those people were dead, because Menhaz had spent the day methodically killing his entire family to prevent them finding out about his lie. He hit them over the head with a crowbar and then slit their throats and took a picture, posted it to Discord. By the time someone from Discord finally got in touch with the Toronto police, it was too late. Menhaz had obliterated his entire family. Menhaz ultimately pleaded guilty to 4 counts of murder and was sentenced to life in prison. Toronto police, it was too late. Menhaz had obliterated and then slit their throats and took a picture, posted it to Discord. By the time someone from Discord finally got in touch with the Toronto police, it was too late. Menhaz had obliterated his entire family. Menhaz ultimately pleaded guilty to 4 counts of murder and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you thought of today's episode, and also remember, we have hundreds more videos for you to binge right now. But if you want a recommendation of, which video to invest your time in, well, here are 2 great options right here. If you want more Mr. Ballin content, click on this one. And if you want some redacted declassified mysteries with Luke LaManna, click over here. All right, until next time, see ya. And at that point, Officer Pyre turned to the news team, pointed at Mercy Road, and said, that's where they found the body. So a little more than 36 hours earlier, at around 4 a.m. the previous morning, a 20-year-old college student named Kara Knott had been found strangled to death in a creek right near the Mercy Road exit. Kara had been on her way home from her boyfriend's house when, for whatever reason, maybe car troubles or maybe she was trying to help someone, but she wound up in that cul-de-sac. And then while she was there, she clearly encountered someone dangerous who took her life. And so this was actually why the California Highway Patrol and NBC News were 29. Today, I'm going to share 3 stories that all have a haunting picture or video that is associated with them. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and super glue their eggs into the cart. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. On the evening of December 29, 1986, a California Highway Patrol officer named Craig Pyre drove his cruiser down Interstate 15 in San Diego, California. With him was an NBC News reporter in the back seat, and there was a cameraman in the passenger seat. They were filming a segment about highway travel safety that was set to air on the evening news later that night. Officer Pyre was following his typical patrol route, but after a few minutes, they passed by a sign that said Mercy Road. It was an exit. And at that point, Officer Pyre turned to the news team, pointed at Mercy Road, and said, that's where they found the body. So a little more than 36 hours earlier, at around 4 a.m. the previous morning, a 20-year-old college student named Kara Knott had been found strangled to death in a creek right near the Mercy Road exit. Kara had been on her way home from her boyfriend's house when, for whatever reason, maybe car troubles or maybe she was trying to help someone, but she wound up in that cul-de-sac, and then while she was there, she clearly encountered someone dangerous who took her life. And so this was actually why the California Highway Patrol and NBC News were collaborating on this news segment, because Kara's killer was still not caught. And so the idea behind this segment was basically to tell drivers along this highway how to stay safe while they were out there, especially if for whatever reason they had to stop somewhere along the highway, what to do in that situation. And so as Officer Pyre passed by the Mercy Road exit and continued down Interstate 15, he turned to the news crew, and as they filmed, he began talking about the basics of highway travel safety. Specifically, he said, look, one of the most hazardous things that can happen to you beyond an accident on the highway is if you have some sort of car trouble that forces you to stop on the highway. Because once you stop, there's an inclination for a lot of people to want to leave their vehicle. But that's a very dangerous thing to do.
Anything could happen. Being a female, you could be raped, robbed if you're a male, all the way to where you could be killed.
Officer Pyre also warned people not to get into a stranger's car, because there was a running theory at this point that perhaps Kara had gotten into her killer's car. As this particular segment was filmed, the one you just watched, Officer Pyre was looking ahead, and he noticed there was a car pulled over on the shoulder of the highway with its hazards on. So he turned to the news crew and basically said, look, here's a chance for us to actually show the people in real time what to do in case the car breaks down on the highway. So he pulled his cruiser over right behind the stalled car, he got out, and then gestured to the news crew to come with. Officer Pyre walked over to the passenger side door of his car, and through the open window, he asked the driver to get out and talk to him. The driver did. The roll, Officer Pyre asked him to explain, what's going on here? What happened to your car? The driver said he had run out of gas and then gotten stranded on the side of the road. And then he had left his car and walked to a gas station to get a gas can, came all the way back, he put the gas into his car, but his car still wouldn't start. Now, at this point, Officer Pyre is realizing that this driver is doing basically exactly what he shouldn't be doing, according to the safety tips Officer Pyre had given. And so on camera, he basically says to this guy, do you understand how dangerous it is to have left your car like that and walked alone on this highway? Do you understand what a hazard that is? And the driver just kind of looked at him and shrugged yeah, I guess so. After that, Officer Pyre called the man a tow truck. His car was towed and the man was on his way. And Officer Pyre got back into the cruiser with the news crew and they carried on. After that, Officer Pyre and the news crew wrapped up filming, and then after he dropped them back off again, they told him what time to expect his segment to air on NBC that night. And sure enough, that evening, Officer Pyre was in front of a TV as the broadcast started. And when Officer Pyre's actual segment aired on TV, to him and to the California Highway Patrol, it went great. It was a minute and a half long. It sort of hit all the high points. It showed Officer Pyre, talking about how to be safe on the highway and talking to the stranded motorists. It kind of did exactly what they expected it to do. And when it was over, Officer Pyre clicked off the TV and didn't think much about it, because it was not a big deal. It was just a basic safety video. And for the vast majority of other people who watched this clip live on TV, it really didn't stand out to them. Again, it was just kind of a routine police safety video. But there were a few people, when they watched this clip, that noticed something very specific. Within an hour of this clip airing on TV, those few people were calling the police in droves to tell them, "We know what happened to Kara Knott." And the police would follow up on these tips. And sure enough, just over 2 weeks later, they'd gathered enough evidence that they were able to arrest Kara Knott's killer. It would turn out all the clues the police needed to solve the Kara Knott murder case were right there in that 1.5 minute long video. Because what happened to Kara had almost happened to over 24 other women in San Diego. And those young women were the ones who saw the news segment when it happened live, and they noticed this particular detail that clearly telegraphed who Kara's killer was. They were the ones who called police. On the night of Kara's murder, December 27th, 1986, she pulled off Interstate 15 on the Mercy Road exit, and she came to a stop in that cul-de-sac. Now, we don't know exactly why she came to a stop in there, but either way, she was there, and that's where she encountered her killer. Now, the other 24 women who encountered the same person, the killer, they were terrorized and kind of tortured and held hostage for a couple of hours, but eventually were let go. But Kara wasn't. During her encounter, at some point, the killer clubbed her over the head and then strangled her to death with a rope. Now, the killer, at first, had gotten away with this, until they were featured on that 1.5 minute long video. And some of those women who had survived their attack, they're watching the segment, and suddenly their attacker is on TV. Now, they had previously reported their attack to police, but to this point, nothing had been done. And now they're staring at, for sure, the person who attacked them, who's right on TV. And critically, as part of this segment, they're hearing about how this other young woman had been attacked and killed on this highway. And they're thinking, oh, this person did that to me. I barely got away. I bet they killed this girl. And on top of that, as they're watching the news, staring at their attacker, they can see there's a fresh cut over their eye. And so put that all together and they thought, boom, that's the person who killed Kara Knott. And sure enough, the police would follow up on these tips and they would confirm that the man in the video with the cut over his eyebrow was Kara's killer. And Kara's killer was none other than Officer Craig Pyre. Officer Pyre was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Since being incarcerated, he has gone up for parole 2 separate times and been rejected both times. However, he is up for parole again in 2027. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. This time of year, right after the holidays and the new year, can be pretty difficult. I mean, you just had all your family time and vacation time and downtime, and now you got to transition back to sort of like real adult life. And that can be hard. It's not out of the ordinary during this. Around 1 p.m. on November 28, 1979, a 52-year-old tour guide named Peter Mulgrew stood at the front of the cabin of Air New Zealand flight TE901. Out the window next to him, he looked out and he saw this vast white landscape reflecting the afternoon sun. And so he grabbed the microphone and announced to the 237 passengers that they were now flying over Antarctica. The passengers got really excited and immediately pulled out their cameras and began snapping photos left and right. And as you can see from some of the photos that they took, a lot of the passengers actually got up out of their seats and moved around to get the best angle of the ground down below. Now, on a normal commercial flight, that behavior would not be okay. You can't just, wander all around the cabin. You need to basically stay seated. But this was not a normal commercial flight. This was a sightseeing flight. Air New Zealand regularly took off from New Zealand and would fly people up over Antarctica, and their tour guide would point out a few landmarks down below, and then the flight would land back in New Zealand. That was the whole thing. It was just a chance to go out and see Antarctica and take photos. Peter had been a tour guide for this flight many times before, and so he knew what to expect. He not only knew kind of how passengers react, but he also knew exactly when to look out which side of the plane to get the best view. And so after a couple of minutes, he called out to the passengers, hey, if you look out the left side of the plane, you'll get a great view of the coast of Antarctica. And so all the passengers, they immediately get up and shift over to the left side of the plane, and they press their cameras up against the glass, they're taking photos. And then a couple of minutes later, Peter called out to the group again and said, okay, now look out the right side where you'll see Mount Erebus, this huge, stunning mountain. Now, Peter was accustomed to people gasping when they saw this mountain because it was so beautiful, so enormous. And as people piled up against the right side and began taking photos, as we heard, people were gasping. But then at the same time, the plane suddenly jolted hard, and one of those passengers on the right side took this photo. As you can see, there are black marks on the window. And these black marks are believed to be either engine oil or soot from Mount Erebus. Because Mount Erebus was not just some mountain. Mount Erebus was an active volcano, and the flight path of TE901 was supposed to have them going safely around Mount Erebus to get a nice full view of the volcano. But mistakes were made, and before the pilots could correct them, the plane flew directly into the volcano. And so this photo you're looking at almost certainly was taken literally at the moment of impact. A crash that resulted in 237 lives lost. The crash of flight TE901 was the worst aviation disaster in New Zealand history, and as a result, Air New Zealand no longer offers those sightseeing flights. At 5:30 a.m. on July 16, 1945, a 13-year-old girl named Barbara Kent was sleeping inside of a cabin in Ruidoso, New Mexico, where she was staying for a sleepover summer dance camp. And as she slept, suddenly there was this loud booming sound that literally shook her awake and actually caused her to fall out of her bed onto the floor. Barbara sat up feeling totally confused, and she looked around the cabin and she saw the 9 other girls that were also here for the sleepover camp. They too were wide awake, and some of them also had fallen onto the floor. And so the girls, they're all freaking out. They're looking at each other like, what's going on here? What was that? And as this kind of pandemonium is ensuing, their lead dance instructor came running into the cabin and told the girls that she thought one of the cabin's heaters had exploded and that potentially there could be a fire somewhere on the camp. And so all the girls, they're already totally panicked. Now they're getting really scared. And the instructor's just like, all right, girls, go outside, stand by the river. I'm gonna go find wherever this explosion happened and make sure everything is okay. And so the girls, they were led outside, totally a mess. And they went and stood by this river near the cabin and waited for their instructor to go look around. And so Barbara and the 9 other girls, they're totally terrified, and they're standing by this riverbank, and they're kind of looking around the property, seeing if they can see smoke or fire, but they can't. And as they're standing there waiting for their instructor to come back, Barbara felt something hit the tip of her nose, and it was cold and soft. And she looked up and she realized it was snowing. But it's July in New Mexico. It should not be snowing. But sure enough, snow was coming down from the sky. And as the snow came down on Barbara, she looked at the other girls, and they too were looking up and putting their hands up and letting the snow hit them in the face. They couldn't believe it. I mean, this was like a totally rare weather event. And so a minute later, their dance instructor came back and told the girls that, she looked all over the camp and there did not appear to be a fire or an explosion of any kind, that everything seemed fine. They didn't know what that loud sound was, but, by all accounts, it seemed safe here. And so the girls were very relieved to hear this, but already their attention had completely shifted to the snow. I mean, again, it's July in New Mexico. There shouldn't be snow. And so the girls, they turned to their instructor and they're like, okay, well, now that it's safe, would it be okay if we put on our bathing suits and just went swimming in the river while it snowed on us? I mean, this is incredible. And the instructor, who to this point had really been focused on finding the fire and the hazard or whatever, now that she knew things were safe, she kind of took in the scene and also suddenly appreciated how unbelievable it was that there was snow coming down. And so she told the girls, yeah, get your bathing suits, go swimming, enjoy this. This is totally like a once-in-a-lifetime moment here. And so very excitedly, Barbara and the other girls ran back into the cabin, they changed into their swimwear, and then a moment later, they were out frolicking in the river as the snow fell on top of them. And for hours, they just played in the river and enjoyed the snow. And the snow was kind of building up on the riverbanks. And so some of the girls went over and scooped it up and rubbed it on their faces and, made snowballs. And they just had a great time. And at one point, the dance instructor came by and actually took a picture of Barbara, who was right in the middle of the river enjoying this bizarre scene. But eventually, despite how fun the snow was, the novelty of it all sort of wore off, and the girls got tired of swimming. They changed into their regular clothes and went about their day. And over the course of the next few days, summer camp went as normal. The girls had a great time, and when summer camp ended, the girls went home. Now, the girls never got an explanation for why it had snowed. They all just assumed it was some super rare weather event that they had been lucky enough to experience. Until 17 years later, when Barbara was 30 years old at this point, and she learned that all the other girls she had gone to the dance camp with had died. One by one, each of those girls were diagnosed with aggressive forms of cancer that killed them. Barbara was the only one who was spared. And she wouldn't get any clarification as to why that happened until decades later in 2006, when Barbara was in her 70s, and the government finally came out and admitted the truth. It would turn out Barbara's dance instructor was correct in thinking there had been an explosion on July 16, 1945. But of course, it was not any of the cabin's heaters or anything local to the cabin or camp. Instead, the explosion occurred 40 miles away at a US government testing site in the middle of the New Mexico desert. And the explosion that literally caused the girls to be dumped out of their beds was from the world's first ever atomic bomb being dropped. It was the Manhattan Project's Trinity test, a test that no civilians in the area had been warned about. And so after this bomb detonated, there was this nuclear fallout that rained from the sky on 500,000 people that lived within a 150-mile radius of the detonation site. And within those 500,000 people were those 10 innocent teenage girls at their dance camp. The snow that the girls played in was actually radioactive material from this nuclear fallout raining down from the sky that over the course of 17 years would give 9 of the girls various forms of cancer that would kill them. Here is the picture that the dance instructor took of Barbara posing in the middle of the river as the snow is falling all around her. As you can see, Barbara is smiling and looking up at the snow, not realizing it's literally going to kill almost everyone in that picture. As for Barbara, she did not die young. However, she would suffer from multiple cancers and illnesses, all associated with radiation exposure. In case you didn't know, we just celebrated Valentine's Day, our annual celebration of the strange, dark, and mysterious, with our first live stream of the year. And we announced on this live show our new exclusive merch drop. But we don't want you to miss out. As part of this drop, we have the crew neck, okay, right here. We have the highly coveted sweatshirt with the very nice options right here. If you want more Mr. Ballin content, click on this one. And if you want some redacted declassified mysteries with Luke Lamana, click over here. All right, until next time, see ya. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and today we're going to look at 3 stories that demonstrate that. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please take the like button out on a fancy scuba diving trip, but replace the air in their tanks with helium. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. On the evening of March 27, 2013, a 45-year-old doctor named Marcelo Gurruchaga dug through a supply cabinet in the clinic that he owned in southeastern Spain. He grabbed an IV needle, anesthetic drugs, and a scalpel, and then he walked to the operating room in the back of the clinic, where his patient was already lying on the table. And as Marcelo looked at his patient, he couldn't help but feel incredibly anxious. This was easily going to be the most important and most dangerous surgery he had ever done. In fact, this surgery was illegal, and one wrong move here could not only harm his patient, but could also destroy his life. I mean, he could lose his medical license, he could be arrested. I mean, this was a very high-stakes operation. But Marcelo felt like he really had no choice here, because he had this huge problem going on in his personal life, and he had been promised that if he did this surgery successfully, that problem would be solved. His hands shook as he gave his patient the IV, and then he began administering the anesthetic drugs. Soon, his patient was unconscious. And then, after a steadying breath, Marcelo picked up the scalpel and then made his first incision. A little over a week later, on April 5th, 2013, a very disheveled and distraught Marcelo walked into a local police station carrying a small cardboard box. Once he was inside, he told the clerk that he had to speak to an officer because he needed to make a confession. A moment later, a detective came out, and right away Marcelo began crying, and he told this detective this unbelievable story. And as he did, the detective just felt really bad for Marcelo. The story was so tragic, so awful. But as Marcelo went along and the details of the story began kind of going all over the place, the detective went from feeling empathy to confusion to full-blown suspicion of Marcelo. Something was off here. And so at some point, when Marcelo finally went quiet and he was just standing there holding this box, the detective looked at him and said, "Hey, what's in that box?" And when Marcelo reached down and slowly opened it up, the detective immediately knew two things. One, Marcelo was definitely lying. Two, this whole situation was far more serious than this detective had imagined. It would turn out the big personal problem that Marcelo was experiencing, that supposedly this high-stakes illegal surgery was going to alleviate, had to do with his wife, Rosa. Rosa was deeply unhappy, specifically about her weight. She felt like she was overweight. And so she had given her husband, Marcelo, the doctor, an ultimatum. She said, "You need to perform a weight loss surgery on me, or I'm going to take my own life." And Marcelo knew this was no idle threat, because his wife, Rosa, had previously attempted to end her life before. And so ultimately, Marcelo agrees to do this illegal operation. But this operation was illegal not because Marcelo was not like a weight loss doctor. No, it was illegal because Marcelo was an animal doctor. He was a veterinarian, not a human doctor. And so Marcelo really had no idea how to perform this weight loss surgery. And so as soon as he made that first incision on his wife, the surgery went completely sideways and Rosa died on the operating table. And when that happened, Marcelo panicked and immediately dismembered his wife's body and cremated her in an attempt to cover up what he had just done. However, over the next week, Marcelo felt so guilty about what he did that he ultimately went to the police and he confessed. However, at first, during this confession, Marcelo told the detective that his wife had died because she had taken her own life. And when the detective began asking probing questions about how she died exactly and when this happened, he began getting answers that didn't really make any sense. And so ultimately, he asked Marcelo to please show him what's inside of that box he's carrying. So Marcelo opened it up, revealing Rosa's ashes. And that told the detective that Marcelo had to be lying because he's thinking, wait a minute, if your wife took her own life a week ago, why did Marcelo immediately cremate her and hide the fact that she had been dead for a whole week? It didn't add up. Ultimately, Marcelo would be charged with his wife's murder, but he would spend 4 years in prison awaiting trial. And then when he went to trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to an additional 10 years in prison. Hey football fans, Super Bowl 59 is right around the corner, so now is fun with DraftKings Daily. And during this traffic stop, Alex had somehow taken the police officer's gun and shot the officer in the head, killing them. And then Alex had fled, and he was still on the run. And so now law enforcement was concerned that because New York was only 6 hours from the Canadian border, that it was very possible that Alex might try to flee into Canada to escape persecution. And so US and Canadian law enforcement and border security were on the lookout for Alex Mangle. And he was this 30-year-old white man with thinning brown hair and a wispy mustache. And so all day long, that Canadian border security guard looked very closely at every person who came through his checkpoint to see if they were Alex Mangle. He would see a family on their way to visit relatives in Canada. He would see a couple on their honeymoon. He would see a man with a car full of camping supplies and a middle-aged woman traveling alone, and all these different people from all walks of life, but none of them looked anything like Alex Mangle. And so by the end of his shift, after checking dozens and dozens of cars and looking at every person, he felt certain that Alex Mangle had not slipped through his checkpoint. And so he clocked out and he went home. A few days later, on March 2nd, a police officer was patrolling this parking lot right outside of a shopping mall in Ontario, Canada, which was located about an hour and a half away from the border. And during his patrol, at some point, he noticed there was this one car, a white Toyota, that had been loitering in the area for quite a while. And so he decided to drive over and see what was going on. And when he got there, he looked inside the vehicle and he saw someone sitting on the passenger seat. And he was a white man, probably in his 30s, with thinning brown hair and a wispy mustache. And this officer immediately recognized this guy as being the wanted criminal, Alex Mangle. And so the officer immediately called for backup, and then he parked his car, got out, and approached the white Toyota where this guy was sitting with his gun drawn. And as the officer approached the passenger side door, the man inside turned, noticed the officer, jumped into the driver's seat, fired up the car, and the Toyota sped out of the parking lot. And so the officer, he jumps back in his cruiser and he takes off after him. And before long, it was like the entirety of the police force in Toronto was a part of this high-speed chase to catch this guy. And eventually they funneled the car into a dead-end street, and the white Toyota crashed into a stop sign, and then the man inside with the mustache and the thinning brown hair pops out, and immediately everybody sees, yep, that's Alex Mangle. He didn't put up a fight at that point. He was taken into custody. However, despite how relieved law enforcement was to have this cop killer in custody, they realized they didn't understand something. How was it that Alex Mangle got past border security and got into Canada? Everybody was on high alert looking for him. What happened? And so police were baffled until they searched that white Toyota Alex had been driving. On the night that Alex shot and killed that police officer near New York City, he immediately fled to this wooded area and hid out overnight. And then the next day, when he got up, he was walking around and he happened to pass by this commercial building. And as he was looking at it, he saw this middle-aged woman, whose name was Beverly Capone, come out of the building and make her way towards her car. And she was all alone. And so Alex walked up to her and abducted her at gunpoint, and then he drove her to this cabin out in the woods that he knew would be totally isolated, no one was there. And once they got there, he murdered her, and then once she was dead, he stole her clothes and put it on, and also cut off her face and her scalp, and put those on as well. He was literally wearing her skin and hair. And he hopped in that white Toyota and he drove up to the Canadian border, and amazingly, he got through the checkpoint into Canada without anybody noticing. It would turn out that Canadian border security guard, who all day was checking for Alex Mangle, did actually see Alex Mangle. He just didn't recognize him because Alex Mangle was wearing Beverly Capone's face, hair, and clothes. And so he thought he was just a middle-aged woman traveling alone, and he let him on through. And so police would figure this whole thing out when they searched that white Toyota, because they would find, lying on the floorboard, was Beverly's dress, scalp, and face. Alex was deported back to the US. However, before he could stand trial, he attempted to escape using transport, and in the process got shot to death by police. However, that was not the end of Alex's story. Following his death, officers continued to investigate him and also his property, and at some point during a search of his property, they would discover all these photos of unidentified women, along with these maps where these very isolated places in New York and Pennsylvania were circled, and nobody knows what they mean. Now, police have not conclusively linked Alex to any other murders, but he does remain a suspect in several cases, and in fact, many investigators believe Alex was actually a serial killer. However, we'll probably never know how many people Alex actually killed because he took all of his secrets to the grave. At 5 p.m. on May 12, 2005, an 18-year-old college student named Simon Eng sat inside of his bedroom in the apartment he shared with his sister Sharon in New York City. Simon was supposed to be doing homework, But instead, he was doing something he loved, which was blogging. Simon would write on his blog just about every single day, and he typically wrote about his self-improvement journey he was on. Not because he thought lots of people were going to read it and be inspired by it, but because he kind of wanted to chronicle his journey so that in the future, when he was the best version of himself, he could look back and sort of see how far he had come, see the progress he made. But on this particular day, Simon was not writing about self-improvement. Instead, he was blogging about something that was totally unusual for him. In fact, he had never written anything like this on his blog ever before. But Simon knew basically nobody read his blog, and so he wasn't really that concerned about writing something so off topic. And so at about 5:05 p.m., when he was done with this very strange blog post, he didn't think twice. He just hit post. 5 hours later, at about 10 p.m., an NYPD detective, along with some other police officers and first responders, arrived at Simon and Sharon's apartment. They went inside and went straight to Simon's bedroom, and there they would find Simon. He was laying perfectly still on the ground, his feet were bound by duct tape, and he was covered in stab wounds. They rushed up to him to feel for a pulse, but very quickly they discovered he was dead. And then before they could even process what had happened here, they heard moaning coming from the other bedroom across the hall. And so they rushed in there, and they would discover Simon's sister, Sharon. She also was covered in stab wounds and laying on the ground, but she was still alive. And so they tried to rush her to the hospital to try to save her life, but in transit, she would die. And she would also die before she could actually tell authorities what happened to her and her brother. For the next 3 days, investigators could not make sense of Simon and Sharon's murders. But then, a detective discovered Simon's blog, and they found his final entry. And it was that very unusual post that Simon did that was not anything to do with his self-improvement journey. Well, it would turn out that last post broke the case wide open. Right before Simon was killed, he wrote in his blog about what was actually happening in his apartment, like in real time, literally what he was seeing and hearing. Here is a screenshot of that blog post. It says, quote, "Today has been weird. At 3, some guy ringed the bell. It was my sister's former boyfriend. He is still here right now. Hopefully, he will leave soon." Sharon's former boyfriend was a man named Jin Chung Lin. And a year earlier, he and Sharon had gone through a really rocky breakup. Now, Sharon had moved on and kind of gotten over the breakup, but Jin hadn't. He was still furious about the way things ended. So he ultimately went to Sharon and Simon's apartment to get revenge. Revenge was murdering the victim's sister. When police confronted Jin with information from Simon's blog post, he immediately confessed to the murders. Jin was tried and found guilty of the murders and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Today, Simon's blog is actually still available online, so you can go and see his final post. However, what you'll really see if you go to his blog is the thousands and thousands of comments from people all around the world hoping that Simon and Sharon rest in peace. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you thought of today's episode. And also remember, we have hundreds more videos for you to binge right now. But if you want a recommendation of, which video to invest your time in, well, here are 2 great options right here. If you want more Mr. Ballin content, click on this one. And if you want some redacted declassified mysteries with Luke LaManna, click over here. All right, until next time, see ya.
In the middle of Wiltshire lies a ring of large standing stones, each weighing around 25 tons. It is believed the monument was assembled between 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. Archaeological evidence suggests it may have been a burial site or perhaps a place of healing where the injured were taken. Some also theorize it may have had a religious or astronomical importance. We call this place Stonehenge. We also call it a monument, but we don't even know if its creators would think such a thing. The culture that produced it left no written records, and even how it was built is still up for debate. In 1136, in his book The History of the Kings of Britain, Geoffrey of Monmouth, an early British historiographer, claimed the wizard Merlin built Stonehenge. Here's an illustration from the mid-14th century based on that theory. For roughly 500 years, building something like Stonehenge seemed so difficult that it was commonly accepted that a wizard did it. Apparently he did it with his bare hands too. Thanks, Geoffrey. It's a mysterious place because it provides us with questions and no real answers. What was the intent of its creators? What did they think of it? And what became of them? What would a Britain built by these people look like? The so-called monument points away to a version of the world that never came to be. Instead, it's one of the sole creations of a culture whose ideas and intent have simply vanished.
Will we ever really know who built Stonehenge? Or what it was for? Probably not. Besides, it's just a bunch of rocks. Anyway, today we're going to talk about Dragon's Lair.
March, 1983. The arcade game entitled Mappy has just been released. You play as a police mouse who has to take back stolen goods from a gang of cats by bouncing around in a weird void with random objects in it. You can't really tell those pinky purpley things are cats, and also one would question the ability of a police captain who sent a mouse with no backup to confiscate stolen goods from an army of cats, but it's fine enough. On June 14th, Mario Bros. Hit arcades. This was the first appearance of Mario's brother, Luigi. Oh boy, I'm so happy to meet Mario but with different colours. Together, up to 2 players can jump around in a hellish void knocking pixelated facsimiles of turtles around. I mean, both of these games are fun to play, but visually speaking, they're pretty poor appropriations of the thing the player's told they're doing. I'm telling you all this so you can maybe imagine the impact when, on June 19th that year, just 5 days after Mario Bros. Told you this mass of colours was a man called Luigi, this happened.
Dragon's Lair. You control the actions of a daring adventurer finding his way through the castle of a dark wizard.
Hey look, it's an actual person who is trying to not die in an actual dungeon-looking place. And look how much animation there is. Look at the actual capital A animation. And if we look closely enough, we can even maybe see a game in here somewhere. The mechanics of the game are very simplistic. You watch the pretty impressively animated character make his way through a room, and then press one of 4 directions or the attack button when it's appropriate to do one of those things. And if you do the wrong thing, you lose a life and get to watch a death animation.
And to store all the data for those animations, the arcade game used a revolutionary content distribution system for the time, called a Laserdisc. Ow!
Laserdiscs had been in use since the late 70s, but the idea of using one of these as a way of storing more picture and sound information than a normal arcade game could use hadn't been implemented in many games at this point. This game was designed by Don Bluth, former Disney animator, and Rick Dyer. Forget about this guy, you'll never hear from him again. Let's just talk about Don Bluth some more. He'd just made The Secret of NIMH, one of the best looking animated films ever, and was about to go on to make Rockadoodle, Thumbelina, A Troll in Central Park, The Pebble and the Penguin, Titan AE, and also some good films. I never saw any of the good ones growing up. So Bluth and his small team used their animation chops to create an actually nice looking game with dynamism and charm. The game looked amazing and everyone knew it. Even though it was more expensive to play than other games, they had huge lines at arcades, and the machine sold amazingly, with arcade producers partially thanking it for getting them through a financially difficult time in history. And I do mean difficult. Outside of arcades, what would later be called the Great Video Game Crash of 1983 was happening. The revenues of home game sales dropped almost 97%. But Dragon's Lair and its appealing gimmick had somewhat insulated arcades from these troubles. This article from 1984 says Laserdisc games may be the wave of the future, and drums up hype for Bluth's next game, Space Ace. Space Ace was similarly great looking, though it was effectively the same game as its predecessor, only with a different theme and new animations. It's just as fun to watch, but by the time of its release later in 1984, however, that wasn't really enough. The lack of gameplay in these games had come back to haunt them in the market. There wasn't much replay value. Once you knew how to beat it, that was it. This put an upper ceiling on how much a person could go back and enjoy something, when other games had many levels and increasing difficulty. Players had grown tired of the style, and arcade owners weren't into buying expensive game units with temperamental discs inside them that players could memorize and never play again.
What they want is variety. We constantly get tired of one type of food or one type of movie or one type of game, and so as you progress, you want to go on to a new thing.
Laserdisc games had proven to be more the splash of the future than the wave, and the tide had gone out. I think I might have gone a little bit overboard with the water metaphors. So what if you wanted more of this type of game, or wanted to see what directions the genre explored as time went on? There've been a couple of revivals over the years, like Braindead 13, which is probably straight up the best example of this weird subgenre of playable animation, and there's also more weird cash-ins from the original boom to go back and find, like Time Gal, or Ninja Hayate, or Super Don Quixote, or Esch's Aurunmiller.
If your timing is off, poor Don will die a hideous death.
Or Cliffhanger, which was actually made out of recut footage from Lupin the Third films, including Castle of Cagliostro. So we technically got an arcade game featuring animation by Hayao Miyazaki. That's kind of mind-blowing.
Jump! Jump!
It was clearly rushed incredibly quickly to make it to market, so the dub is so atrocious that you can actually make out the original Japanese voices from the films underneath. Dragon's Lair's namesake earned it a good deal of notoriety and nostalgia, even as its format and imitators failed. The game had several sequels, and has been repackaged many times onto almost every imaginable console. There was an Indiegogo campaign to fund a piece designed to help fund a Dragon's Lair movie. In other words, to take even what game there was out of their game. There's also a couple of different ports that are actually new games, including a famously ridiculously difficult NES version, of which I've never even beaten the first screen. There's a rubbish SNES version of Space Ace, but neither actually captures the thing that made these games cool and unique at the time, so they wouldn't be all that interesting even if they were fun. So if you're interested in tracking this genre of fully animated adventure game, there isn't that much to track. But what if I told you there was an even more true successor to Dragon's Lair than the hasty sequels or the cash-ins?
What if I told you there was a secret, forgotten third game in the saga of Dragon's Lair and Space Ace? Ooh, saga. That makes it sound important. But first, a question everyone seems to take for granted. Who made Dragon's Lair?
When people think of Dragon's Lair, they think of Don Bluth. It's easy to see why. Let's look at one of the posters. Magicom presents a Don Bluth Studios production. Design and animation, Don Bluth. Produced by Don Bluth. Directed by Don Bluth. Copyright, Don Bluth. Posters don't have to be arranged this way. This is a purposeful choice. It creates the impression that, like a modern-day Merlin, Don Bluth assembled Dragon's Lair with his own two hands. Geoffrey of Monmouth never left us. He just became a marketing consultant.
The creator is Don Bluth, who once directed several Disney features in the mid-1970s. Last year, Bluth found his own audience with his first animated feature, The Secret of NIMH.
You see, people tend to remember history in terms of winners. Secret of NIMH had been wildly successful the previous year. Don Bluth was swiftly becoming a household name, and his legend about leaving Disney and piling everything he had into NIMH, even mortgaging his house to complete it and making it all back and more, was compelling. History likes people who gamble and win, and history tends to only remember whose name was on the poster. History has a knack of not remembering the hundreds of talented people who worked on Secret of NIMH, or the other animators behind Dragon's Lair, or the programmers who made the system work at all, or the man who actually made the game.
The idea of turning cartoons into video games was developed at Rick Dyer Industries.
We're in the entertainment business.
Remember Rick Dyer? Despite the game actually being conceived and programmed by RDI Video Systems, and RDI being short for Rick Dyer Industries, history appears to have conspired to make sure people forget Dyer and that the game was his idea, and that he'd had this idea for a long time.
It's the forerunner of Dragon's Lair.
It was developed way back in 1979.
This was Dyer's first computerized interactive game.
Dyer had spent his youth making fantasy games using text and pictures drawn onto cash register paper, programmed to scroll to the right point as he made choices. When attempts to sell a digitized game along these lines failed, he decided that more animation would create a better connection with the viewer, and started work on Dragon's Lair. Later, he hired Don Bluth's studio to do the animation itself. But despite his success, Dyer was aware of the flaws with Dragon's Lair and Space Ace. Firstly, he'd wanted people to be able to play them at home, but arcades had become a necessity given the expense of the technology required to play them. Secondly, they were short and had limited scope in terms of story or genuine decision-making. Dyer had gotten into making games as a kid because he liked to make big adventures with grand stories. He wasn't happy with Dragon's Lair or Space Ace. He wanted to make something bigger.
I think right now the arcade industry is playing catch-up to us. I know what's coming after the introduction of our home system. What I'm going to do is to create a world that is so real and that you will have a hard time telling what's real and what isn't.
In late 1984, Dyer's company began work on what he hoped would blow the lid off of home gaming again after its collapse. He was about to announce a new games console. The Halcyon was an incredibly ambitious system. The name, designed to deliberately invoke the name of HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey. And no, that's not me being weird and reading too much into it this time. They really meant to invite that comparison.
If you remember the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, there was a computer in that movie called HAL.
Why you would make your console invoke the name of an AI that goes mad and kills most of its crew, I don't know. I think he might have fallen asleep halfway through the film. For the time, it was ambitious, the same way Dragon's Lair had been. You could speak to HAL, the name of the AI in the Halcyon, and it could talk back to you and even remember your name.
Good evening, HAL.
What do you want, Rick?
What do you want, Rick? Sounds so mad at him.
8.
4847 spins.
Disco. Maybe he's what a computer should have been all along, something that anybody can use because anybody can talk.
Hang on. Clearly Rick Dyer's never been to Liverpool. Ha ha! Ha! Obviously this is basic AI by modern standards, but the idea of a home media device you could talk to in 1984 before the 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System was even out in America or Europe was kind of amazing.
Visit worlds which were only dreams before Halcyon, like nothing you've experienced ever.
Here's Dyer demonstrating how on a 1985 edition of the show Computer Chronicles.
If I have your voice print, please say your name.
Stuart.
Nice to see you again, Stuart Sheffield. And I call you Stuart.
Yes.
Yes, okay,
Pretty
Stuart.
impressive.
And to launch with it, Dyer and his team were working on a new game. It was called Thayer's Quest.
The game that comes with this is Thayer's Quest.
This is a story about greed, about unbridled ambition and power lust, and the disaster resulting from those faults.
Thayer's Quest was going to be more than just a video file with button prompts. Thayer's Quest was going to be an adventure.
What we're creating is going to allow you to be anything that you ever wanted to be and experience it. You're gonna be there. You will live and die by your decisions.
A game where you choose where your character goes on a journey across a world of 5 kingdoms interacting with an all-new fantasy story.
Unlike standard video games that demand quick reflexes, the new project places a premium on thinking. You talk to the computer, and it will talk back.
An adventure featuring animation instead of just text or the day's primitive graphics, utilizing Laserdisc technology once more, but on a scale even more grand than the game's spiritual predecessors, and doing it all in the player's own home.
We're estimating that you'll be able to play the game 20 hours a week for 6 months before you will have explored the entire world.
The price tag of this home Laserdisc player / games console / talking AI computer? $2,500 US. That's nearly $6,000 in 2017 money, which means that in the UK it would cost at least £400. Laserdisc players were crazy expensive at the time, but even that was pretty steep. But hey, you could play an animated adventure quest by talking to a computer.
There's never been speech recognition of the high caliber that this has.
Well, not really.
Let's go to the forest clearing.
1.
Word.
1.
Speak consistently, Stuart.
1.
Sir.
2.
2.
Is that okay? I mean...
Sure.
You see, this was the 80s. People had an idea of what the future was going to look like without really knowing it or thinking about its practicalities. The future is always different from how people of the present think the future will be. The Halcyon was ultimately a poor facsimile of one man's best guess as to what the future would look like. And it turned out not to be a very good guess. Still, I really wanted to know what this device was actually like to use, and what Taya's Quest played like, so I decided to take a look on eBay and see if one popped up. That was a year and a half ago. So far I've seen one go up for $600 plus some hefty import fees. Based on rumblings on other forums, one tends to appear on eBay, perhaps even the same one, every year or so. While flyers advertising the Halcyon were circulated, and some stores even took pre-orders, and some salesmen were given copies to demonstrate to potential customers, it's actually up for debate whether the Halcyon was ever officially released. It's possible that this shot contains every existing Halcyon. As far as I can tell, no museums have a Halcyon in their corridors, except possibly the Video Game History Museum in Frisco, Texas. If I ever end up in Texas for some reason, like, I don't know, my plane crashes, I'll head there and see if they've got it. So, the Halcyon was a failure. It didn't sell very well. In fact, it arguably didn't actually make it to the stores in a way people could buy, and the company went bankrupt pretty soon after. But that's not the end of Taya's Quest. When the company started to go under, they started selling conversion kits for Dragon's Lair arcade cabinets. It's hard to tell how well those sold either, but Laserdiscs, marquees, instruction manuals, and EEPROM chips from the game are floating around on eBay, so there's probably at least a few. I've heard tell of the arcade version appearing at conventions and some other gaming events. It's still pretty rare though, and the Laserdiscs alone cost hundreds, never mind if you'd be able to get together the technology to actually play them. Wait, what's this? Taya's Quest? On CD-ROM? From Canada? For only 19.94 Canadian US dollars? I mean, I had to. Didn't I? I had to. I needed to know.
And here we are. Is it in the shot? Okay, great, yeah. Decades and entire consoles later on a disc far smaller than it was ever designed for. This disc was printed in 2005, over 20 years after it was originally made. And that means it's another 12 years old on top of that. The latest system requirements that it recommends what operating system you can use is Windows XP. God, remember those days when that was the fastest operating system? It even smells of Windows XP. Like a very old new car smell and just the beginning of dust. It's beautiful. It's like a time capsule. Thanks, Canada. Hey, according to this Digital Leisure put this out. You might remember them as the people who did some PlayStation Home like casino games that were pretty popular. And then when PlayStation Home closed, I think they're moving them to Steam. And then before that, they did the re-releases of Dragon's Lair and the sequel to that and Space Ace, didn't they? So it makes sense that they would do this. Did they also do Mad Dog McCree and Space Pirates? Space Pirates is like a game only I seem to remember whenever I bring it up. I hope I'm not imagining that game. Anyway, let's close the loop on all this and actually give this game a look, shall we?
In a traditional fantasy land, the bad wizard man thing, Sorsabal, has killed almost all of the Elder Kings and is going to take over the world. The last in the Elder Kings line is the player character, Taya Alkenred. His wizard mentor, Druce, wants him to gather the 5 artifacts that form an amulet called the Hand, made by another wizard named Quode, in order to beat Sorcerball.
Quode is gone, but the one who will come remains.
I am ready.
But before Druce will send him on his quest, he gives him a final test. That rhymed, that was weird.
There, choose an exit quickly, or fail this test of magic.
You have to choose the left door or the right door. If you pick the right door,
you have failed there.
You're dead. You're just dead. Your mentor's test kills you immediately if you choose the wrong door. And he's supposed to be the good guy. Anyway, if you get it right, he gives you a pouch with your first 3 items, single-use spells which are the solution to 3 puzzles in the game, and then you get to go out into the world.
I have tried 22 apprentices over the years, and they have all died.
I bet right now Taya's thinking, yeah, and how many of those did you kill by sending to the ticking clock flying symbol fantasy zone? The game does diverge in gameplay from its predecessors in a kind of significant way. You actually choose places to go and what items to use, and take your time to make decisions. You're no longer hitting buttons to not die while traversing a linear path. It's incredibly simplistic though. A lot of choices amount to picking one and hoping it's not the one that kills you, like with the 2 doors, but it's a fairly significant difference. It's basically a really rudimentary point-and-click adventure, or perhaps to be a bit more accurate, a choose-your-own-adventure book like Warlock of Firetop Mountain, or Creature of Havoc, or the Goosebumps ones. You choose where to go from the list, with a mouse in this version instead of saying a number out loud, sadly, and sometimes you use an item. It's very trial and error. For example, at this point, a lady gives you this advice.
My son was your age when he learned that the coal fire, which burns on the marsh waste, can destroy the landwares.
What's a landware? How is this advice useful to a player? It's a made-up word! Then at one point later on, these ghosts attack you, and then you get one chance to use an item, and you die if it's the wrong item. Well, guess what? These are the landwares! And you need to have gone to a place that's covered in fire and click on it to then realise it's cold fire, so that you take some and then put it in your bag first, and then you use it here to kill the landwares and progress. And yeah, the game lets you use the scrolls in places where they don't solve the puzzle they're made for, and they're just gone. You can waste a scroll on the landwares if you think that's what you're supposed to use, and they even have it so they don't kill you for trying, even though you can't progress at this point, because you can no longer pick up this crystal without exploding, because you needed the scroll of release. The art and animation isn't nearly as good as in Dragon's Lair or Space Ace. It looks okay, but it was quite clearly rushed. The game keeps finding excuses to not have to lip-sync anyone's mouths.
There, I remember when you were but a child.
I can only give you this pouch. Choose where in the kingdom of Wygarde you wish to begin.
Friend, can you help me?
Druce sent you, didn't he?
Dryads?
Yes, and we know of your quest. Can destroy the landwares.
Help! Go someplace else! Someplace far away!
Are you the people of the dunes? I mean no harm to you.
Words deceive. Show us proof that you mean well.
Go away. Strangers aren't welcome.
There are different voice lines for coming back to some areas more than once, which means the animation with no clear mouth movement can be easily reused. I think this is why they did it, but it just means the whole game looks less good at the expense of being reusable.
What? You again?
What? You again? Overall, it's a lot less dynamic or fantastical than the other games, but since it relies more on decision-making than quick reflexes, I can understand the visual change. Some of the deaths are still pretty funny. This might just be the only game in history where you can be killed by wheat. Also, the voice acting's pretty good, isn't it? Apart from, after you kill the false King Torlock, remember that name by the way, one of his guards has this to say.
I'm sorry, I had no choice.
For 10 years I've waited to see this. Thank you, friend.
Nothing says welcome to a realm of fantasy and adventure quite like Kermit the Frog. This version is basically just a bunch of video files playing in a custom video player. If you check the disk's files, even the inventory screens are just .mpegs on a loop. It's almost clever how they managed to get the old game to fit together on a new system, but it's also a reminder that the game you're playing is literally just a collection of interlocking menus, like the weird bonus games they used to put on early DVD releases of films. Anyway, after a bit over 30 minutes of trial and error, somewhat less than the months Dyer predicted, I had 3 artifacts and reached the bridge to the 4th kingdom, the Far Reaches.
Pass and be warned that the southern barbarians roam the far reaches. It is a lawless kingdom now.
Wait, what? You have beaten Teya's quest? More challenges await you in Shadowrun, the sequel to Teya's... What? The game ends with a trailer for a game called Kingdom Shadowrun. Why does the main character look so different? How is there a sequel to a game no one played on a console that no one bought? How did playing this game only give me more questions? What?
Okay. It turns out there's one more twist in the tale of Teya's quest. There's also the twist that it's pronounced Thea's quest, but it's too late to re-record all the voiceover, so...
The game was either left unfinished or intended to be the first part in a series released hastily to try to recoup costs for it and the Halcyon, with plans to make a sequel before the company went bankrupt and the whole endeavour was scrapped. While this 2005 CD is a close to faithful version of the original audio and video of the arcade version, and also there's a DVD version released at the same time just for DVD players and there's some more behind the scenes footage on it, a decade prior, in 1995, 10 years before this version and 10 years after the original release, the game was ported to the 3DO, the CDI, and DOS PCs under the name Kingdom: The Far Reaches. The CDI and 3DO are basically considered critical and commercial failures, but this is perhaps the one context where I can't make fun of them, because even they're a step up from the game's previous release on a console that never even officially came out. God, I feel kind of sorry for Rick Dyer. The poor guy kept trying and it kept just not quite working out. This version of the game is the one that got the sequel, Kingdom Shadowrun, released a year later for the same consoles.
Some versions of Kingdom Part 2 Shadowrun are just called Shadowrun for some reason. I also picked up a copy of Kingdom Book 1 The Far Reaches, just to see what changes they made apart from the title. Let's check that out real quick.
You coming with me, boy? This version uses more compressed graphics, but also makes a bunch of weird changes. Along with the title, a bunch of character names have changed too. The Elder Kings are now the Argent Kings, Teya Alkenred is now Lathan Kandor, Druce is now Dalen, Quode is now Mobus, and Sorsabol is now Torlok. Torlok has become Drake's Blood the Wicked. Obviously this means the voice acting had to be redone by new actors. And by actors, I mean whoever Rick Dyer got to program this new version got into a vocal booth for like 5 minutes.
Mobus is gone, but the one who will come remains.
I am ready.
I can't verify the quote, but apparently Dyer thought the original names were 270s, so he changed them. I don't think the names were the problem with the original's release. It was probably everything else. I can almost see Dyer in my head trying his very best to step as far as possible away from the game's previous incarnation, given its frankly traumatic history. The opening sequence is now an optional cutscene triggered at the beginning, which ends before Dalen makes you do the stupid bit with the doors. When you start the game, you get a piece of all-new animation, which looks kinda bad, in which Lathan gets told by Dalen about Drake's Blood seizing the throne and how you need 3 artifacts to stop him. This is an interesting change. The original game ended suddenly partway through, and this cutscene basically rewrites the entire plot to be about doing the thing you actually end up doing towards the end of the actual amount of game they made. Too much of the game's dialogue references the evil wizard at the beginning, and he still appears in the game to attack you, so they couldn't take him out entirely. It's so weird to have one opening talk about the evil wizard who's now called Torlok, and then the actual opening tells you your quest is to stop a different bad guy who isn't called Torlok anymore. Like everything else about the legacy of this game, it's weird and esoteric for seemingly no reason. Even the name is weird. The Far Reaches is one of the 2 kingdoms from the original you don't end up going to because the game ends on the bridge to visit them. Why is this version called Kingdom: The Far Reaches when there's no Far Reaches in it and there's technically 5 kingdoms? That's a plural amount of kingdoms. I wish I hadn't noticed this, it's just frustrating. The gameplay is a bit different too. You now click around a map screen to decide where to go. The first place you go is Dalen's mansion, where the cutscene from going through the correct door in the original just sort of plays as if you just walked in, and he gives you the scrolls. They also added more complex puzzles. For example, this guy who just talks to you in the first game is now blind, and you get a scroll of seeing from Dalen to use to get his advice. Dalen also asks you which scrolls you want him to work on next, so you actually get to make a couple more choices than in the original, and The use of a main map screen actually makes it feel like you're traveling a world. Kind of. Slightly. A little bit.
My son was your age when he learned that the cold fire which burns on the marsh waste can destroy the mist monsters.
They call the land wares the mist monsters in this version. It's like Dyer actually got my memo. Now the puzzle is decipherable by humans. Once you save the princess, you get the second new cutscene that's clearly new animation, where the princess says thanks and invites you to stay.
I accept your gracious offer, princess.
Then, together, they invent fireworks. Also, there's this really rocking track that plays when it's trying to load the credits. I think I want this as my new ringtone. And the credits roll and the game ends with the trailer foreshadowing. So now, after covering this new version of the game, we can actually talk about its sequel. Its animation style has been altered significantly, and the character looks completely different. I have a feeling Dyer & Co. wanted to further differentiate Kingdom from Teya's Quest, and did so by changing how everything looked when the time came to make new animation for this sequel. Or maybe he just had different animators at this point. At this point, they probably either moved on to bigger projects, or quit and become a baker. Working as an animator is really hard at the best of times, and working on Teya's Quest seemed like it was a nightmare. The sequel is basically just more of the sort of gameplay from the previous game. You get the other two relics, and finally, after over a decade of waiting, you get to kill Torlok.
Yeah!
And that was it, and then Layton kisses the princess from the first game, and fireworks go off again, but there's more this time. And credits.
Where do we go from? Around every turn.
Why did I make this? Well, maybe because it's an interesting story.
An immensely popular game that went away so quickly that its successor was all but forgotten. A recklessly optimistic console in a period when home gaming was hemorrhaging money that never even made it out the door. And a relentless barrage of unpronounceable names.
In June, this warehouse will come to life. The new home video system that Rick and Jan Dyer have banked everything on will be shipped from here.
My wife and I, as you probably can guess, are gambling everything we own on this. So it's kind of scary, but that's the sort of thing that makes you want to succeed.
Rick and his wife threw everything they had into Halcyon. And Halcyon took it all, took everything. And then it was gone, leaving them as barely a footnote in the history of video games. Maybe it's because I think Don Bluth is overrated, and I find his continued attempts to revive Dragon's Lair to be a little bit crass, and wanted to talk about the game's actual creator instead of the man who keeps getting the credit. If you type Rick Dyer into Wikipedia, you get a disambiguation page linking to two possible notable Rick Dyers. One of them is ours, the video game designer. His page is 3 short paragraphs in length. The second is titled Rick Dyer, and then in brackets, Bigfoot. Some guy who spread Bigfoot hoaxes is remembered in more detail than the inventor of Dragon's Lair. Or maybe it's because, the way modern gaming's going right now, I'm a little bit worried. The marketplace is only getting bigger, and the tools of game creation are more available than ever before. And that means there's a lot more games competing for people's attention. There may not be another Crash, but it's still a very big pool for a small fish. In any creative medium, it's scary to work knowing that what you create may only exist in permanent obscurity. The people who make it might be talented, but increasingly, they're also very lucky. Undertale got recognized because Toby Fox was in the right place at the right time with an already existing following around his Homestuck music. Dragon's Lair did well partially on the back of that name they put all over it. The next designer with the talent Toby Fox had might not be so lucky.
The ancient Romans used to tell the story of a man called Romulus, a fantastical figure descended from royalty, raised by wolves who took part in all the most important foundational events in Roman history, and named Rome after himself. The Romans looked at their society and liked to imagine that it had all been the plan of some great genius. The Romans believed in dozens of mythical engines of creation. What was one more? Hundreds of incredible works of art have been done of epic historical events, huge important moments in history, the actions of gods or supposed men like Romulus. One of my favourite paintings is The Lace Maker. Johann Vermeer painted a loving, accurate and detailed rendition of a girl making lace. Vermeer celebrated real people, doing ordinary things. He offered the radical idea that you didn't have to be special or important or magical or legendary to be worth being painted or thought about or remembered. So it turns out there are two ways of explaining history. We can be like Geoffrey of Monmouth or the early Romans and invent these magical, wondrous, brilliant people who gave everything to us. A wizard made Stonehenge all by himself. A man called Romulus invented Rome out of whole cloth and took part in every major historical event required to fulfill his amazing design. Don Bluth made Dragon's Lair. Or we can be like Vermeer. A bunch of ordinary, everyday people built Stonehenge just by working together and putting time and effort into it. A bunch of ordinary people make video games by working together very hard for hours and hours and hours and days and years to make it. A bunch of regular, ordinary people built Rome over the span of a very long time, contributing to what would later be remembered as the exploits of one man. This way is nowhere near as magical as the ones we like to imagine put our world together. The truth is often very mundane. But maybe that's okay.
We're pioneers. We're doing something that's never been done. We have artists, we have writers, we have engineers, we have technicians. They're all working together, and that has never existed before. There's never really been a reason for those three groups to all coexist simultaneously. What we're really doing is combining art with science.
I think there's something sad but beautiful about Rick Dyer and his dreams of Halcyon. He calls himself and his team pioneers in this news broadcast, and the truth is, he's right. Pioneer isn't an inherently positive term. It just means you were among the first to explore something, and that doesn't mean you were successful or right. A lot of early pioneers didn't make it back. And a lot of people, a lot of us, are going to end up more like Rick Dyer than we'd hoped to be. So if we can't learn to love and remember people like Rick, we're condemning ourselves in turn to be forgotten. Your work might not reach the audience it deserved, or you might not make something anyone likes, and it can be soul-crushing to embark on a journey knowing you might not succeed. But if we can learn to accept that it's okay to try and fail, that people who fail are worth being remembered and appreciated, then maybe we can all at least learn to enjoy the humanizing experience of failure together. Thank you for watching. This video was quite a lot of time in the making, and I can only do things like this with the support I receive through Patreon, so I'd like to thank my supporters very much. In addition to the names scrolling past the screen right now, I'd especially like to thank James Adair, Nathan and Bronwyn, XX_antfucker69_420XX, and you have to pronounce the 4 X's, Jon Anders Bremer, Parker Anderson, Jenny Angel, Sheena Artrip, Brennan Arts, Cal Ashton, Heba Assad, Amy B, Jordan Barrett, Sam Bayliss, Max Barbecue King, Findley Bowick Copley, Graf and Blackpool, Big Boy, Jakucha Boris, A Bowl of Creamy Tomato Soup, Eric Bronner, Chip Bush, H Bomber Guy but with breaded mac and cheese hands, H Bomber Guy but with yowie hands, Eugene Butler and Samuel Butler, I hope they're related, that'd be cool, Kurt C. Yost, John Cantwell, Zachary Clark, Stephen Cohn, Philip Coffey, Krista Collin, Justin Conkerbeard, David Craggs, I'm Daddy's Little Bitch, seriously though I'm trapped inside of a Cormac Delaney, Hjort Dog, I don't know, like a butt or something, Jason Durso, an egg painted to look like a man, Avi Finkel, a fish named Nabby, Kit Foley, the Frankfurt Shawl, Corin Gardiner, Andrew Gilly, the godforsaken strongest rat alive, Aiton Goldstrom, Zoe Goin, Rachel Gray, Scott Gertin, Willow H, Michael H. Prey, Mark Harmon, Rebecca Harold, Jack Harvey, Nathan Hoare, I, H. Bomber Guy, am deeply in love with Jim Sterling and want to kiss hit, World Heavyweight Champion Patrick the Breezy P. Finnegan, Rickard Hevosmar, Tyler Howard, Eric Hunter, James Id, Eden Yankovic Sumar, Ace Jenny, Besotten Jenny, General Ginger of the Oz All-Girl Revolutionary Army, Qui-Gon Jinn, good night, sweet prince, Ben Kaplan, Dave Kemp, Sean Kemp, Adrian Kingsley Hughes, Thomas Kistner, Florian Knox, Lucas Koken, Renee Larshaug, Paul Laswell, Alex Lemkovich, Gracie Lipscomb, Kelly Mariella Kay, Benedict Marco, Gary Marshall, Tom Martell, Christopher McDonald, Spunker McGraw, Jacqueline Merritt, Katie Mersax is a Cutie, John McNone, Garrett Mitchell, 3/5 of a Brain, Hero of Time 88, Alicia Parker Martell, Justin Partridge, Richard Pearson, S. Peter Davis, John Petterson, Robert Phillips, Siegfried, Slayer of the Immortal Dragon, K. Played Dota, Alistair, Please Play Life is Strange, Silas Pumpkins, Alexander R. Corbett, Totally Radical Politics, Several Rats participating in an elaborate and daring casino heist, Davis Remy, Evan Ritchie, Lissy Roberts, David Rose, Vendella Ridbeck, Anna S., Super Saiyan Rose Kamikensei, Elijah Scanlon, Marco Shard, Justin Schwendemann, Andrew Scheimer, Naoto Shirogane, Mons Silverplatz Toonstrom, George Soros, The Spectre of Communism, Mike Stanley, Niltiak Stealer of Souls, Ash Stryker, Daniel Sullivan, Lord Sir Mr. Supercalinihilisticexpialidocious of House Hanmore, Luke Swanson, Al Swigert, Adult Sword Owner, Coach Tajina Carlos Mad Dog 6 Strats RP Walk 2 Chains Kabito, David the Benevolent Malevolence, Gar the Internet Dog, Maria the Maiden of Blue Fire, Jeffrey Theobald. I think Brandon is an awesome guy and I want to be his friend. Kevin Thurber, Pio Gadig Tigran Vetisian, Jordan Tullis. It turns out I was wrong about everything. Handsome Unlimited, Tapio Unto Oscari Taronan, Ryan Van Shark, Riley Van Dyke, Daniel Vincent Chilton, Heretic Void, Grick Von Ghoul, Christopher Wade, Jason Walter, Thad Wazalewski, Pete West, Catherine Wilde, Ryan William Cox, Lewis Woodrow, Don't Worry Buddy, Don't Worry Buddy, Don't Worry Buddy, Don't Worry But, Seamus Husarian, Recovering Zombie, Aisalon, Amontadillo, Kieran, Clawsu, Kabiza, Commissar Taco, Dash of Week, Devon's Hands Melt, Femininja, Geekyapar, Get Dunked On, Gnostic Dude, Hey It's Grace, Hero of War, James, Jeremy, Jerry Terry, Joe, Calfsile, Catherine, Lauren, MacArthur, Minty Freakin' Fresh, Momi, Mr. Clonum, Niflet, Procor, Rue, Samael, Shadowbag, Sigma Vega Sigma, Syntharana, Sol, Soy, Swamp Selkie, Sylian, Ure, Whackman, Wargarble Smurf, Weebka, XXX_Swagmaster420_XXX, and Zodak. And now it's time for a new segment I'm putting at the end of this video called What Things Did I Get Wrong in the First Draft of This Video that my patrons who get an early version of the video pointed out and reminded me to change. Firstly, I'd like to say a big thanks to Kenny Green, who pointed out that I somehow managed to misspell Goosebumps book cover as Ghostbusters book cover in the credits, and an extra special thanks to Garrett Lathy, who pointed out that I forgot to put his name in the credits. Thank you for pointing that out, and I'm so sorry.
So let's pretend that J.K. Rowling, one of the greatest authors of our time, came to me for feedback on her new Wizard screenplay. I took a writing class one time, so I'm qualified. Well, overall, I did like Fantastic Beasts, which has nothing to do with me being a huge, obsessive Harry Potter fan. But right now I'm going to constructively talk about some issues I had with it and give feedback on how to fix it. Let's do it. By the way, oh my god, every spoiler. Don't watch this until you've seen it or decided you don't care. Problem number one, it had exactly as much filler as I was pretty sure it was going to. So watching the trailers, I was like, huh, I'm really excited to see more of the Wizarding World. And like, it's cool that it's set in America. That's different. But hey, it kind of looks like a lot of this action is just chasing monsters around and trying to catch them while they make a lot of noise. It's a lot like the critically acclaimed masterpiece Lilo and Stitch the series. But trailers always put in like the action nonsense sequences, so you're like, oh, this movie has action. So I was like, I'm sure there's a lot more going on other than that. And there really wasn't. I feel like I'm like becoming an old lady, and when I go to movies and they have one of those scenes where it's just like stuff is getting wrecked and there's a fight, I'm always just like, here comes lots of noise, and I just feel like bombarded. I like sit back in my seat and I get all flinchy. It's like the cinematic version of sitting somewhere where there's like a person in front of you with a spray bottle and they're just spraying you in the face with this spray bottle for like 9 minutes. Like, I don't get it. Who likes that? Who's asking for those scenes? 10-year-old boys. The answer is 10-year-old boys. Anyway, how am I gonna fix this one? Because the plot is just like Newt has to round up his creatures. In my reworking of the script, Newt says to his zany friends, oh no, my creatures are loose and I gotta go find them. They go on this madcap adventure through New York City. They're like following this trail of silly destruction. Nothing lethal, because it's like whimsical. And finally, this trail leads them to a little alley, and he goes inside and all of his creatures are just all together in one place, quietly resting in a consolidated pile. And he's just kind of like, oh, there they are. And he just opens his suitcase and that's it. And then the story can continue. And it's very quiet and peaceful. Number two, none of these locations are as magical as the Harry Potter films. So I do realize that Harry Potter has an unfair advantage because like they're books, so there's more room for stuff, for world building stuff. Also, that was set at a school, one school for 7 years, so you get to revisit the same locations over and over again. But also, let's be real, like this setting is way less cool too. I mean, like, let's look at Harry Potter and acknowledge that even the really miserable places in the book are places that people would want to visit. You better believe that if Universal Studios had like a Malfoy Manor dining experience, or like a Chamber of Secrets bounce house, or the Voldemort Resurrection Cemetery taco truck pavilion, I would be there immediately, and so would a lot of other people. I'm not sure I'm as stoked to visit magical places like 1920s Muggle New York Customs Office, U.S. Wizard Government Building, Goldstein Sisters 2-bedroom apartment, or who could forget Crazy Witch Hunter's desolate orphan soup kitchen. Could be a Buffeteria style restaurant. I did think the Wizard Execution Chamber was cool, but not in like a yay, let's go there kind of way. The thing is, the Harry Potter films weren't just set in London, they were set in Wizarding London, and this film is just set in New York. And it's a version of New York that doesn't even have Newsies. I mean, it definitely seems like the deliberate standout location was the inside of Newt's suitcase. And we've had bags with stuff inside of them in Harry Potter before. Like, we had Hermione's purse that could fit a bunch of stuff. And there was that whole year where Mad-Eye Moody was trapped in a trunk. Probably not even the saddest year of Mad-Eye Moody's life. Anyway, they spent a long time showing us the interior of the suitcase. But the whole thing was like so CG heavy that you had no sense of like a real location at all. It also was bad because it kind of ruined the whole idea of Newt's conservation mission. Like, I don't know, it kind of looked like he had perfectly adequate space for all of his creatures right in the suitcase, and he didn't have to go anywhere and do anything. I mean, it's the suitcase that seems to have shifting walls and no borders, and it has perfect magical replicas of their exact natural environment. And they all seem really happy and safe and stuff, and like not getting attacked by poachers. I get that the suitcase is supposed to equal zoo enclosure, where you're like, it's nice, but it's not the wild. But it kind of is. Because, like, even a really nice zoo, their limitation's usually just going to be space. Like, space is limited, space is expensive. But space is not an issue. Unless, like, you mean to tell me that Newt's commander can have a suitcase with a 5-acre interior, but 6 acres is silly and impossible? And if it is, he could just get another suitcase. Maybe suitcases like that are expensive. But you know what else is expensive? A voyage to America. Anyway, here's how we're going to punch up the locations. According to me. me. So we're gonna set the film entirely in Coney Island. If you want, you can still have the characters just refer to it as New York City. Just kind of willfully pretend that you think New York City is just Coney Island and you're confused. You're British, so nobody's gonna get on your case about it. Maybe you could reveal that when the park closes at night, it like becomes Wizarding New York. Like that's where everyone goes to buy their wizard stuff and hang out with wizards. So you don't have to compete or invite comparison with Wizarding London, but you're also just like casually, totally making something a lot better. Like, oh, Diagon Alley's nice and doesn't have a Ferris wheel. People love theme parks, especially vintage ones. Like even if you're not there, it's cool to look at them. And hey, you know what's easy to replicate for a Universal Studios theme park? Another theme park. The ride concepts basically write themselves, because they're just the rides. Number 3, the creatures didn't actually look that good. This movie had like a lot of CGI. A couple of the creatures looked fine. I mean, like the snake looked fine and the rhino looked fine. And I don't know if that's because their skin is like easier to replicate or because they just had different lighting conditions. But there was that one character, the Niffler, who was basically just like an echidna. And it just looked like a fake echidna. I get that you can't use a real animal, really, because it has to like have this range of emotions and do crazy stunts. But I don't know. Something looked wrong. Maybe make it look less like a real animal or something. Like it very rarely felt like it was actually a thing in the same room as the actors. Also, there was like a goblin, and the goblin was CGI. Was Warwick Davis busy? And you hate giving dwarves work? Was he at least like voiced by a dwarf? Since the movie is so creature heavy, this is again not an easy problem to fix. I would say they could just use puppets or animatronics, but that costs money and it's hard. Instead, I think they should just pressure Joe to create creatures that are a lot like normal creatures. Eddie Redmayne's like, it's a southeastern Scrog Thumper. His silly, befuddled friend is like, I don't know what that is. Eddie Redmayne's like, well, it's a cat, but instead of 2 eyes, it's got a big cyclops eye in the middle of its face. Just glued right on there. Just putty. Looks like putty, but it's an eye. That's part of the creature, is that it looks fake. Another creature's like an octopus that has oven mitts on its arms. Look out. Oh no. If they absolutely don't want to cast a dwarf, then they could just get a normal guy to be the goblin. He just walks in, he just looks like a normal guy, but the characters go, it's a hideous goblin. He's gonna take all your money, because he's a greedy goblin. Look at his scary, pointy teeth. Just beady little eyes. It's just a really unlucky extra that was on set that day. Number 4, the twists aren't really twists. So I get that Harry Potter has an unfair advantage because it's a book and there's more in it. So you can just seamlessly blend in clues with world building stuff and nobody knows that they're being fed clues. So they don't figure stuff out as easily. In a movie, you say something to the audience and they go, why did you say that to me? And they start figuring stuff out. Harry Potter also had Harry serving up some heavy confirmation bias in his narration. So he'd see something happening and he would immediately start speculating to us about why that might be, which is not the same as being an unreliable narrator, by the way. Like, that's not what that term means. He's just a bad detective. So Ezra Miller was obviously the Obscurio. Or Obscurious. I feel like all of those are right, and they each mean like different forms of the same word. I've only seen the movie once, so. Anyway, it was obviously him, because we were spending the most time with him. Everyone that was killed by the Obscurus was shown wronging him, and he was shown being angry about it. And Newt had that line like, usually they're 10 or younger, which to me just like confirmed it, because it was so obviously there to throw you off the scent. The twist wasn't like, oh my god, he's the Obscurus. It was like, why did Colin Farrell not know that he was the Obscurus? The twist was that Colin Farrell is dumb. What movie was he watching? Speaking of Colin Farrell, I knew he was the Anchor in the Wall, and apparently there are a lot of like clues in posters that I didn't look at, and in the visuals of the movie, which I didn't see because for like the first 50% of any movie, I am just looking at my popcorn and enjoying eating the popcorn, thinking about how I want to get a free refill on my large popcorn. So like I didn't see any of the concrete evidence people have been talking about, but I did notice that Colin Farrell seemed very evil, and also that one time he just had a necklace of the Deathly Hallows logo. I got this for you at Hot Topic, Ezra, and it's gonna make you feel better by alerting your mom that you're sympathetic to magic users so that she'll beat you more. So allow me to fix this. My twist is that Colin Farrell is a good guy, and he just makes dumb decisions sometimes, and it's not his fault. He's trying his best, you guys. And his wife just had a baby, and he isn't getting a lot of sleep. And that baby's name is Madame Rosmerta. Madame is her first name, and Rosmerta is her middle name, and she goes by both of them. What does it mean? I don't know, because there's no real connection. But one character was related to another character whose name you've heard before. And that means that's a twist. Mind blown. Number 5. Ezra Miller just oozes miserable slime from every part of his face. I did really like the casting in this movie. People are always like really mean to Eddie Redmayne, and I feel like he's been good in everything I've seen him in. Maybe not good, but he's tried really hard. I like when actors just like try really hard, even if they're in a really stupid movie. I don't know who any of these other people are, but they like worked as their characters. Tina was probably my favorite character, and I think Ezra Miller is great. Ezra Miller also gives it his all when he's crying. Whenever he's crying, you see like a trail of liquid coming out of his face. You can't tell if it's from his eyes or his nose or his mouth. It's just really gross to look at. Just a trail of slime from something. I get that if you can cry really intensely and unself-consciously as an actor and just push slime out of your face, that means you're a really good actor. But it's gross, and if I was the director, I would just say, like, just don't do that. Ezra, don't do that. Please, just don't do that. That's my solution. Number 6, I have one problem with the casting. So I just said I liked the casting in this movie, and there's one notable exception. And it's bad enough that you probably already know who I'm talking about. So as I said before, I figured out pretty early on that Colin Farrell is Grindelwald. And I was kind of like, yeah, this is good, this is perfect. Good actor, good looking face, get it, Dumbledore. And I liked Voldemort, but now we have a villain who's like a little subtler. He's very reserved, and you kind of feel some humanity from him there. Like he very much believes in his ends justifying his means. And then, like a real life horror movie, his face melts away and reveals this leering, heavily made up Johnny Depp face. He's all looking like a bleached out, vengeful clown. I'm a very reactive film watcher, and I was just like, no! And I wasn't even alone here. I heard a bunch of other people like groaning. Someone booed. The guy behind me was like, oh, come on. Like, yeah, I agree. Like, not to be mean, but I'm kind of like, Dumbledore endangered the whole wizarding world for this? He looks like when Judge Doom from Who Framed Roger Rabbit turned into a toon. But then when they're like, he's a toon, he like turns to them and goes, actually, incredibly, I am supposed to just be a normal man. I don't know, people have always given Johnny Depp a hard time for being over the top. And I've always been one of those idiots that's like, well, he's good as Jack Sparrow though, leave him alone. But like, it's kind of awkward watching someone like mug and flail around and do silly voices when he allegedly punches his wife in the face and verifiably has like kicking, screaming, violent wine bottle throwing tantrums drunk in like the morning. Like you see him in Finding Neverland and you're like, oh, he never grew up. And then you see him in the leaked footage and you're like, oh my god, he never grew up. It's awkward because like this is a done deal. Like even if people react poorly, you can't just write out Grindelwald. He's already like the big bad guy for this time period. Well, as always, I've got a solution. So, Fantastic Beasts 2, which I hope is called The Monster Book of Monsters. Clearly the better textbook. There's like an establishing scene of Grindelwald in wizard jail. It shows his face, and his face morphs from Johnny Depp into Colin Farrell, or like another actor. It's disguises on disguises. Now that's a good twist. Number 7, the stakes are extremely low. So until the Grindelwald twist, our main villain is the orphan-raising, witch-hating Muggle lady. I was like, that's cool. We never have Muggle villains in Harry Potter. And then I was like, oh, the reason we don't have Muggle villains in Harry Potter is that Muggles can't do anything to wizards. I mean, I guess the Dursleys hurt Harry psychologically. The witch haters have Salem in the name, which I assume is supposed to be scary, but canonically in Harry Potter, the witches getting burned at the stake in Salem were just casting tickling charms on themselves and were impervious to the flame and thought it was funny. So that kind of detracts from the seriousness of the threat. The highest stakes scene is when Tina and Newt are about to get straight up melted in acid. And that was weird because you're like, oh, I guess in the American ministry, just one guy in a little cubicle can be like, execute this former agent, and also do it right now. And it doesn't need to be approved by anybody, and will just be unquestioningly carried out by nice people who both knew and liked the suspect. Like, why did Tina want to go back to working there at the end of the movie? Did this not make things awkward? Actually, there's a lot at the Ministry that doesn't make sense. The wizards can't let muggles find out about wizards because it would, like, upset the status quo. The muggles would, like, hurt their own feelings if they knew the truth. Like, I get that the initial widespread panic would be, like, bad news for everybody, but it's just hard to be nervous when Newt is, like, in the bank or the jewelry store, when you know that if he was really in trouble, he could just magic himself out of whatever bind he's gotten himself into, and then erase the memories of everybody who remembers it. I guess if it's a lot of muggles, it would take a long time. And that's inconvenient. This would be really bad if information could spread exponentially in seconds, like via the internet, but fortunately it's set in the 1920s, so that's not an issue. I like the end when the wizard president is just like, oh no, we can't erase all these muggles' memory. There's like 1,000 of them, and like 100 of us, and I'm tired. We're just all gonna die. But it turns out there's a fix for that too. Newt like gets out his giant eagle. It's like Buckbeak, but it's not a horse, so it's less special. Newt goes like, I was gonna wait until we got him to his natural habitat. It's not a big deal. Just let him out now. And then majestic music plays and we watch a whole montage about how Newt's entire journey was pointless. He didn't need to come to America, and the movie didn't need to happen, because I guess that eagle would have been fine anywhere. So now let's fix this. We know that Muggle Witch Hater Lady doesn't pose a threat to our wizards, but she can still be scary because she is dangerous to all the orphans that are under her thumb there. They could have just played that up a little more. And to do so, they'd want to develop more of the kids' personalities than just Ezra Miller. Like, as many as possible would be ideal. You could give them all silly New Yorker accents to make them more endearing. Maybe have, like, one of the short ones have to get around on a crutch so people feel more sympathy for him. Then, give these kids their own agency. Have them express discontent with the situation that they're in, and try to get out of it. Give them dreams. Maybe one of them wants to go out west, which is a beautiful parallel to how Eddie Redmayne wants to take his eagle out west to Arizona. These kids are resourceful, and eventually one of them has the idea to start a union. Until they get benefits, they are not passing out any more pamphlets. The witch hater is furious because with all these kids on strike, she can't keep telling people how witches are evil. Now maybe the director can add in some singing and dancing to make this all more stimulating. The witch hater bows to the pressure and gives in to the kids' demands. And then immediately afterwards, she is killed by an obscure hit. Anyway, those are my solutions. I mean, the good news is we're getting more wizards movies. I think the sequels could be really fun. So was ending on an extended Newsies joke like a bad call? Because I could kind of feel while it was happening that it was a bad call, but I couldn't stop myself. And I'm gonna leave it in. I can feel it. So that's everything. Bye! The moral of this movie is that you should protect wildlife and their rights, but if they can help you in some way, just put them in New York. They'll be fine. They already owe you for saving them, so even if he gets hit by a plane, karmically you're coming out on top. Accio, biased review.
forces beyond this universe. We think we are so clever. But we're like children. And when these vast creatures look down on us, our entire reality is in danger.
So what's your name?
Just the doctor.
All right, then. I'm called the nurse.
There is something already connecting us.
I'm an ordained Anglican Marine. This is a time machine.
Boom.
I am not one of your adventures. You need to get me home.
This might be the wrong way round.
You're Scooby-Doo.
Honey, I'm Velma. We are meant to voyage out there and own it.
We're just popping in.
Girl, you are beginning to enjoy this.
Welcome to the Interstellar Song Contest!
Oh, we're so sane.
We're staying.
I love a good show.
So the game to them.
I'm beaming at ya!
But the games are deadly.
Tell a story.
Aren't you scared? Why? Because it likes the taste.
I promised that I would keep you safe.
You can't.
I can. I will. I do. I will take you home. That is a promise.
Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Doctor Who YouTube channel.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. As part of all the first looks that dropped recently, some of them were for the Fantastic Four movie, specifically for Franklin Richards, most powerful character, or one of the most powerful characters that Marvel's ever introduced in the live-action movies. There's scenes of the brand new version of Silver Surfer. There are even some sly Spider-Man Easter eggs in the background in what look like some scenes from what might be the end of the actual movie, so we'll break it all down. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. This is just the tip of the iceberg. We got Avengers Secret Wars, Avengers Doomsday stuff. I've already done a couple videos for that, so I'll post the links at the end of this. It is going to take a while to work through all these first looks. Some of them are really, really good. Some of them raise more questions than they answer, too. Like, wait a minute, what's going on here? As is usually the case with Marvel, a lot of the concept art and early work that they do on these movies winds up being way cooler than the stuff that actually winds up making it to screen. Starting with the biggest stuff first, Franklin Richards. There have been a lot of theories about what he's going to be doing in the movie, how the movie's going to invoke his character. There are a lot of scenes in the trailer that it seems like Marvel has edited in misleading ways so that you don't see that Sue Storm is probably super pregnant during most of the trailer scenes. Most of these scenes of Franklin Richards, though, are long after his birth, after he's become a toddler, and Reed Richards in this scene seems like he's built him a floating baby chair. Very Reed Richards kind of thing to do, but because it's the 1960s era, it's very retro-futuristic in terms of vibes and design language. Just like the rest of their universe. The only thing that I don't think is going to stick is obviously all their costumes. Like, look at the way they're dressed. This is probably not going to appear in the movie. Just the idea that Franklin Richards is a big part of the movie. But you do notice that Herbie in the background looks pretty close to what his final design is in the actual trailer. So, like, this is very, very close. Not totally clear what this boombox looking device beneath him is. It's probably not a boombox. Seems like Johnny Storm is using his powers to actually heat up his coffee.
Now picture that, but everywhere.
Then beneath Sue Storm, it just seems like there's some toys that belong to Franklin Richards that Reed Richards built for him. Moving along, you see the characters in their lounge room with Herbie serving them drinks, them sitting on the couch, and Reed Richards is reading to Franklin Richards, who either seems like he's falling asleep, like he's fallen asleep in his arms, like traditional kids do when you read to them at night. And notice that Johnny Storm seems like he's holding a retro-futuristic version of an actual smartphone with a camera on the back, like he's got a 1960s version of what an iPhone might look like if Reed Richards created iPhones in the 1960s. Now we know how the Fantastic Four is making all their money, just all this technology that they're creating. Also love Ben Grimm's sweater. Can they start making these as merch and selling them right now? It's clobbering time. I definitely think she's supposed to be pregnant during this scene, and Marvel just edited the trailer when she's giving the tour of their building and they're talking about dinner at 7 p.m. every Sunday night. Clearly looks like she's pregnant during this scene where she opens the door trying to find out what Johnny Storm is doing sitting inside his suit on that chair. And I think this scene of her with Reed Richards with their spacecraft exploding all around him and her turning invisible briefly here while she's in his arms is when she might be giving birth to Franklin Richards. Like she's actually giving birth in this scene. Then there's an image of Reed Richards' company, and it seems like he's just installing energy, like this clean energy devices that he's created around the city. You actually saw it in some of the concept art that they released during Comic-Con, where there's like a clean energy facility, sort of like arc reactor technology, but it's Reed Richards' version of clean energy. Imagine if he'd introduced that during the 1960s, how that would have reshaped the landscape of the way the world uses energy. But it seems like his giant device here, like his giant car crane here, is just a huge version of Herbie that he's constructed. Also, funny way of them spelling energy on these crates, like it says Menergy. Then there's another scene of Sue Storm using her powers with the rest of them. Notice their costumes all look very different too. They look more like the original Chris Evans era Fantastic Four costumes with like the solid blue and the black. Not totally sure where they are, but they seem like they're caught on a river and she's using her powers just to keep them afloat. My assumption this is just meant to be an early idea for an action scene that showcases the way her powers work. There's a bunch of different shots of ideas that they had for Herbie early on. Personally, I think the design they went with is fine, but like way down here on the bottom here, this swole looking version of Herbie is actually pretty cool. Just imagine somebody trying to sell some of this stuff as actual merch. This should actually be pretty cool.
Supervillains and superheroes figures, each sold separate.
Then there are a couple looks at Sue Storm with a relatively newborn Franklin Richards, like right after he's been born. Notice the different costumes that they were thinking about here. These also look way more futuristic than the very, very 1960s costumes that we see in the actual trailers. Not totally clear if some of these designs that look like they're more contemporary were based on a version of the movie before they decided to go full period piece during the 1960s, like set the actual movie itself during the 1960s. There might have been a couple different versions of the movie where they envisioned making it where it was set closer to present day. The other very obvious thing here is that this does not look like Vanessa Kirby at all, so I'm assuming that this was done before they actually signed a contract with Vanessa Kirby, and they told everybody that was actually working on the movie to make all the designs look like Vanessa Kirby for Sue Storm. But the obvious thing being here that there are several different versions of Franklin Richards as a newborn and then as a toddler, very clear that he's a big part of the movie. Next real big thing is our first actual look at Silver Surfer in the movie, and it's meant to be Julia Garner from Ozark playing what seems like the Shala Ball version of the character. This is an alternate universe, so I'm just assuming that Norrin Radd in this universe was never the Herald of Galactus, or he's already been the Herald, and then she's taken over after him. In the comics, the whole transition was that he had rebelled against Galactus, so we needed a new Herald, and he selected Shala Ball as that one. If you watch that classic 1990s Silver Surfer animated series, she's actually featured at the beginning of that. In the comics, she had a relationship with Norrin Radd, like that was their connection in the main 616 comic book universe. As far as I know, though, this Julia Garner version of Silver Surfer is not going to survive this movie. Like, she won't make it into Avengers Doomsday or Secret Wars or everything that comes after. I think because Marvel eventually wants to introduce a Norrin Radd version of the character from the comics in a post-Secret Wars world. But it seems like what's going on in this scene is that she's attacked like she's first come to Earth and she's facing Reed Richards here. Notice his costume still looks a little more futuristic, but she does look like she's in full Silver Surfer attire, like she is fully silver on the surfboard. Her glowing hands would just be her manipulating the power cosmic given to her by Galactus. Although it does look, when she raises her right hand here, when it's glowing, it looks a little bit like she's holding the Tesseract, which I don't think is the case. I think it's just more of the power cosmic. I am sure when the Fantastic Four movie comes out, that'll be another big question too. Like, what's going on with the Infinity Stones in this reality? Like, have they already found them? Have they found one or two? Because in the original MCU version of Earth, a couple Infinity Stones were on planet Earth already. Then it seems like we get a scene of Sue Storm in a more futuristic looking costume and a futuristic looking tech hallway here. Not really sure what kind of facility this is, fighting somebody else that's attacking her. Notice it's blue beams, and it almost seems like it's ice powers fighting her, but this could just be the way they're depicting it with the color on screen. This could be her fighting Silver Surfer or something like that, but it could be her fighting another mutant of some kind. Here's a scene of Sue Storm in a more contemporary-looking outfit, and notice Franklin Richards' costume here seems like a Spider-Man themed costume. Like, these definitely look like Spider-Man themed colors. There have been so many questions about other MCU heroes showing up inside the Fantastic Four movie, like which heroes from the MCU that we're familiar with exist during the 1960s and will pop up in different versions in the Fantastic Four movie during this era, the 1960s. There are a lot of MCU characters that were alive and very active during that period. Howard Stark is a really good example of that, probably one of the best examples. But I think because they're trying to differentiate the new Fantastic Four movie in this alternate universe, we won't see a ton of that. The closest I think we're getting might be Robert Downey Jr.'s version of Doctor Doom. But he's meant to be Victor Von Doom, not just Iron Man in another universe that's calling himself Doctor Doom. Then we get what looks like an extended fight scene of Sue Storm fighting off a bunch of attackers here coming inside this apartment here. This might just be in the Fantastic Four's tower here, like their actual building that we see in all the trailers. But notice some of the people in the tech gear here look like more futuristic tech gear. Some of these lower, though, look a little more 1960s period. So part of me just wonders if these are all from different versions of the movie, where, like I said, one of them they were envisioning being closer to present day, and the others were when they decided to make it a full 1960s period piece. Like, no, we don't want futuristic stuff. We want stuff to look like it's from the 1960s. Part of me is wondering if this is going to be from later in the movie after the Fantastic Four find a way to escape their universe. There's a lot of theories about how this is going to go down. Like, we might actually see Galactus destroy their version of Earth and Reed Richards use his multiverse bridge like he did in the Jonathan Hickman comics to actually help him and his family escape before that winds up happening. Like, measure of last resort, there's nothing we can do to stop Galactus. He is hungering for this planet. He's going to destroy it. So the best thing we can do is just escape with the family.
Set people, let's move, let's go.
There have been a lot of theories about Galactus' tie to Franklin Richards in the actual movie. The current rumor is that Galactus wants Franklin Richards to help him rebuild his original universe that he came from. I've done a whole bunch of Galactus videos in the MCU because there have been a couple Marvel movies in the past where they've tried to introduce him and then removed him from the movie at the last minute. It sounds like Galactus in this movie is going to be a multiversal being as opposed to the comics where there are a different version of Galactus in every single universe, but the whole concept of his origin is the same in the different versions, like the MCU version and the comic book version. He comes from a previous version of the universe before it was destroyed in this heat death and then reborn to a new version of the universe with another Big Bang. Without getting into like a 10-minute explainer for the whole concept of multiple Big Bangs in real life, that's actually a real-life scientific theory. Galactus is from a previous version of the universe and was the last living being to witness the heat death of his version of the universe, the multiverse really. So the living entity of that entire multiverse basically agreed to fuse with him so that they could survive the next Big Bang into the next iteration of the multiverse. So Galactus essentially became the combination of the scientist Galen of Ta and the living embodiment of the previous version of the multiverse, which is why he's so powerful. Basically like the remnant of a previous version of the multiverse running around in giant form. The whole thing about Galactus, though, even though they're trying to be very comic book accurate to his depiction in the actual movie, we only see the back of his head. Gonna look really cool to actually get that full shot of him, hoping they release that in one of the next trailers. One of Galactus' big abilities is being able to change his appearance based on whoever's race he's coming to consume. Like whichever planet he goes to, whichever race lives there, he just makes himself in their image. So that's why when he comes to Earth to consume it, he looks like this giant man wearing this huge helmet. If he were to go to the Skrulls' home planet and he showed up to consume their world, he would look like a giant Skrull.
For that, I will destroy their planet.
But everyone post all your reactions and your theories based on all these first looks in the comments below. There's a bunch of other stuff for other movies and other TV shows too, like the canceled Iron Man 3000 TV show. I'll try to do a video for that next. There's just so much stuff. It's going to take me a couple days to get through all of it. If anyone has any first looks at the new X-Men movie that Marvel is working on, just pass them along. I promise I will not tell anybody about it. The other real big reminder is that Daredevil Born Again episodes are starting Tuesday night. My video for the first couple episodes will post after they release them, probably on Wednesday morning. Be sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss any of that stuff, because it is supposed to be peak. Peak Marvel is back. Everybody click here for that first look at Avengers Doomsday, and click here for all my Daredevil episodes. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are here with what may very well be the most important comic that Marvel is releasing right now. This is the Time Variance Authority comic written by Catherine Blair, who was the writer of Loki. And so one of the things that I want to specify, and we'll talk more about this here in a second, is this comic seems to blend the Sony multiverse, if you want to call it that, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and the Marvel Comics multiverse all together into one cohesive story and bridges them by way of the Time Variance Authority. And the first inkling of this comes with Earth 65 Spider-Gwen. Most of you guys know her as, Spider-Gwen from Marvel Comics. Now, specifically, the comic says that the Stephanie Phillips Ghost Spider story explains how it is that she got here to being part of the TVA. It actually doesn't. As far as I'm aware, the most recent story deals with her dealing with King Loki, right? So it may very well be that like a future issue will answer that question. I don't entirely know. So I'm not really sure why Marvel included this here. But the bigger point, and to kind of answer the question, is this really the Marvel Cinematic Universe TVA? Well, outside of the logo, Spider-Gwen's here, right, kind of laying low, essentially, and helping the Time Variance Authority with their whole marketing strategy. But then she ropes in Mobius, and you do get a kind of blending here, right, where Mobius is like, I don't really want to be here, I don't really want to work on this stupid marketing thing, right? In case you forgot, Miss Minutes, you tried to kill me and a bunch of my friends. And the response of Miss Minutes is, that was an unfortunate coding error, and B15 said that we need to have more recruits now. And she's like, this is a massive problem for the TVA because we used to prune entire timelines in the name of one sacred timeline. Then you and your buddy figured out the timekeepers, the ones calling the shots, were not actually real. And then that same buddy destroyed the temporal loom, freeing every timeline, and then B15 let people decide to leave or stay.